This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee, the martial artist, philosopher, and actor whose explosive charisma and unmatched skill had already made him a global icon, laid down for a nap in a quiet apartment in Hong Kong's Kowloon Tong district. Just 32 years old, Lee was on the cusp of superstardom, having just wrapped production on Enter the Dragon, a Hollywood meets Hong Kong film poised to cement him as the first Asian American leading man in major motion pictures. Lee was riding a massive wave of international momentum, with Enter the Dragon slated for release in just a few weeks and a string of ambitious projects on the horizon. He had begun laying the groundwork for Game of Death, a deeply personal film that blended his martial arts philosophy with cinematic innovation. And he was in negotiations for new Hollywood roles that would further solidify his crossover into Western stardom, including developing ideas for a television series and expanding his production company, Concord Films, with dreams of having full creative control over his work. By the early 70s, Bruce Lee was more than a martial artist. He was a cultural revolution. His combination of speed, strength, and screen presence broke racial barriers and redefined how Asians were portrayed in Western media. He had already turned heads with The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, but Enter the Dragon was poised to be the game changer, the movie that would introduce his philosophy of Jeet Kune Do and his deep commitment to mind-body discipline to a global audience. But behind the scenes, Lee's body was beginning to show signs of wear. Just a couple months earlier in May, Lee collapsed on a Hong Kong dubbing stage, suffering seizures and swelling in his brain. Despite the scary episode, Lee changed little in the aftermath, recovering quickly with a drug called mannitol used to reduce swelling in his brain, and resuming his intense training, strict diet, and packed work schedule of meetings with producers, and choreographing elaborate fight sequences and revising scripts with his trademark perfectionist zeal. Lee was unwilling to let the health scare derail his ascent to global superstardom. Indeed, with Enter the Dragon poised for that huge debut, Lee could have taken a moment to bask in the accomplishment, or perhaps take a victory lap during its promotional tour. But that was never his style. Instead, he remained immersed in his work, editing the fight scenes, rehearsing the choreography, and even fielding offers from Hollywood studios that finally saw his star potential throughout the summer. But he was also pushing himself beyond physical limits, fueled by that intense regimen of training, dieting, and relentless ambition. And this day was no different. Lee was in Hong Kong to have dinner with and discuss a possible film collaboration with former James Bond actor George Lazenby. He then met up with producer Raymond Chow to discuss his upcoming project, Game of Death, and worked with Chow until around 4 p.m. From there, Chow and Lee drove to the home of Taiwanese actress Betty Ting Pei to go over a script. Chow left for a dinner meeting shortly thereafter, and Lee reportedly started to complain about a headache. He took a prescription painkiller and laid down to rest. When Ting was unable to wake him later for a dinner that evening, she panicked and tried to revive him and called Chow back to the house before finally calling for an ambulance. It was too late. He was declared dead on arrival at nearby Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Bruce Lee was just 32 years old. I'm Derek Kaufman.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And this is Last Days, Bruce Lee.
Given his iconic status, Lee's death immediately fueled rumors ranging from interesting theories in search of evidence relating to the toll of a strict diet and fitness regimen to rank speculation and conspiracy mongering about murderous plots by Asian gangs and a supposed curse on his family. Some of the more outlandish theories involve speculation that Ting had poisoned him after Lee attempted to end an adulterous affair, or that Lee had been killed by triad gangs as retribution for Lee beating up the son of a local gang leader in his youth. For her part, Ting later reported receiving death threats following Lee's death, saying, quote, "I was only 26 and was so afraid of death at the time. Nobody came to help me." People also blamed his business partner, Raymond Chow, surmising that Chow may have been resentful about Lee gaining too much control of their production company. As for the triads, there was speculation that Lee refused to pay Hong Kong gangs for protection on his film sets, prompting an angry revenge killing. But none of it lined up with the evidence. There was even a farcical theory that Lee was killed by a so-called touch of death technique by a cabal of Chinese kung fu masters upset about him teaching foreigners about ancient martial arts techniques. The official autopsy report was penned by a prominent British pathologist named Donald Tier, who concluded that Lee suffered a death by misadventure, caused by cerebral edema due to a reaction to compounds in a medication called Equagesic. Equagesic is a combination drug that combines aspirin with a tranquilizer to treat tension headaches. The drug has since been discontinued in the U.S. due to possible toxic effects. Lee had reportedly taken the drug many times before. There was also cannabis discovered in Lee's stomach, although Tier said it would be, quote, irresponsible and irrational to connect his death with the effects of marijuana.
So what exactly did cause the fatal brain swelling that killed Lee? A 2018 biography by Matthew Polly speculated that the swelling could have been caused by overexertion and heat stroke, as Lee had been busily working the entire day in Hong Kong's sweltering July heat. Bruce Lee had previously removed the sweat glands in his armpits via surgical procedure in 1972, believing the sweating detracted from the aesthetics of his fight sequences on film. And of course, we know sweat glands are essential for the body to regulate its temperature, as the evaporation of the sweat on the skin provides a critical cooling mechanism that keeps the body from overheating during exercise and other physical activity. There are also theories, including one cited in a December 2022 issue of the Clinical Kidney Journal, that attributed Lee's death to hyponatremia, a condition brought about by overhydration, causing an imbalance of sodium levels in the blood. Lee, of course, was fastidious about his water intake and his fitness regimen, and the drugs in his system may have impaired his kidneys' ability to excrete excess fluids, essentially diluting your blood with too much water intake. And the lack of the sweat glands may have also led to water retention that compromised his sodium levels. So this was a very famous thing about Bruce Lee. He cared a lot about how his sequences looked on film and removed those sweat glands. This was known about him. He had this procedure. It was in the late 60s or early 70s. In the early 70s. And that can have some serious health consequences. People still have that surgery to this day. It's very risky.
There's a reason we have sweat glands. I think, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, but it's important to contextualize his death as something that led to, I think, the fame he's had after death. It was so mysterious what he went through. I was very much aware of Bruce Lee at the time. And he was so mysterious. His death was so mysterious. All these various theories were bandied about.
He was 32 and in impeccable shape. Look at a Bruce Lee movie.
If there's anybody who's not going to... And it wasn't of like his heart exploded, which can happen to a 32-year-old. It was these sort of theories and speculation and no real answers and sweat glands being removed. All this was talked about, but it honestly led to, I think, his fame. Enter the Dragon comes out and he rises to a whole new level of fame. But his death, I think, elevates him further because it added to this, like at the time, right, this Asian martial artist was very mysterious, attractively so.
Eastern philosophy, in sort of racist ways, was seen as a sort of mystery.
Look, the average American's exposure to Asians was not nearly as common as it is today, where we all have Asian friends and they're part of our daily lives, right? Back then, this was like the representative of Asian culture to us, and we kind of looked to him as like, boy, this is mysterious and wonderful and weird.
He was exoticized.
Very, very well said. Exoticized is absolutely right.
And you're right. And that's where this flood of conspiracy theories, I'm sure you've heard them growing up, the triad, killing Bruce Lee and so forth. It really just was a misadventure, as the pathologist said.
Bruce Lee's death left a hole in both the martial arts world and the broader landscape of film and cultural identity. He had opened doors for generations of Asian actors, challenged stereotypes, and helped elevate martial arts from niche fascination to global phenomenon. In life, he was a bridge between East and West. In death, he became a legend frozen in time. Tributes poured in from people he'd worked with on film, some of whom would continue his traditions and forever change the landscape of martial arts cinema. Chuck Norris, for example, one of Lee's rivals and co-stars on The Way of the Dragon, said, quote, Bruce had one of the most brilliant martial arts minds I've ever known. He was a true pioneer and changed the face of action cinema forever. NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who trained under Lee and co-starred with him in the posthumous release Game of Death, said, quote, Bruce Lee was more than just a friend and teacher. He was a visionary who broke down barriers, physical, cultural, and cinematic. His loss is immeasurable. His funeral in Hong Kong drew tens of thousands, and a second memorial in Seattle, where he was buried, saw fans and family gather to honor a man who had become far more than just a movie star. His pallbearers included Hollywood icons like Steve McQueen and James Coburn, which bore witness to his incredible impact on leading men at the time. Even the most hardened tough guys of the era, who were difficult to impress and unlikely to genuflect to other actors in the industry, were in awe of Bruce Lee. McQueen, a close friend and student of Lee's, said, quote, Bruce was like a brother to me. He was ahead of his time, and I don't think the world was quite ready for what he could do. Years later, Coburn would reflect on Lee's impact on cinema and culture, saying, quote, Bruce was a lightning bolt, full of energy, ideas, and this incredible drive. His spirit was so fierce, and I think that's why his death left such a vacuum.
And even today, Bruce Lee's influence runs deep in the movements of MMA fighters, in the storytelling of modern action films, and in the personal philosophies of artists, athletes, and thinkers. Quentin Tarantino, the legendary director whose obsession with martial arts cinema of the 70s led to his iconic Bruce Lee-inspired costumes in the Kill Bill movies, said, quote, "He was the first martial arts superstar, and more than that, he was an artist. Bruce Lee didn't just kick ass, he made you think differently about what that even meant." His ideas about discipline, self-expression, and adaptability remain as relevant now as they were when he first wrote them down in the margins of his journals, proving that one man, armed with vision, skill, and unshakable belief in himself, could shift the global culture. Bruce Lee's legacy stands as one of the most profound and transformative in both martial arts and cinematic history. More than just a film star or a martial artist, Lee was a philosopher, innovator, and cultural bridge whose impact transcended borders. His explosive speed, magnetic screen presence, and radical ideas about combat helped rewrite the rules of action cinema. But perhaps more importantly, Lee's holistic approach to martial arts, melding physical discipline with personal expression and mental clarity, laid the groundwork for countless martial arts icons who followed in his footsteps. Action stars like Chuck Norris, we mentioned, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Steven Seagal built careers on the path Lee forged, often citing him as their primary inspiration. And even decades after his death, Lee's philosophy, best encapsulated by his expression to "be water, my friend," continues to echo in gyms, dojos, and motivational talks around the world.
Lee was born in San Francisco but raised in Hong Kong, where he began his journey in the entertainment industry as a child actor. He appeared in over 20 Cantonese-language films before the age of 18, becoming familiar with the rhythms of performance and storytelling. Yet while his early fame in Hong Kong cinema established his presence, it was his deepening commitment to martial arts, particularly under the guidance of Wing Chun, Master Ip Man, that began to shape the path he would ultimately walk. Lee's return to the U.S. in the late 1950s was a turning point. He enrolled at the University of Washington, where he studied drama and philosophy, and soon after began teaching martial arts, combining elements of various disciplines into a system all his own. This synthesis of the disciplines he learned from Ip Man, plus his own contributions to the world of martial arts, would eventually become Jeet Kune Do, Lee's groundbreaking martial arts philosophy that rejected rigid styles in favor of adaptability, efficiency, and personal expression. Jeet Kune Do wasn't just a fighting style, it was a rejection of dogma, a belief that each individual must absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely their own. Lee opened martial arts schools in Seattle, Oakland, and Los Angeles, attracting students from all walks of life, including celebrities like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He pushed against the traditional boundaries of martial arts practice, often clashing with the more conservative elements of the martial arts community, especially for teaching non-Chinese students, but his influence was undeniable. Lee's breakthrough in American pop culture came in 1966, when he was cast as Kato in the television series The Green Hornet. Though the show only ran for one season, Lee's lightning-fast movements and charismatic screen presence captivated audiences. Despite limited dialogue, he stole every scene, and his fan base grew across both America and Asian markets. But Hollywood continued to underestimate him, offering limited roles that failed to match his talents, and a frustrated Lee returned to Hong Kong in the early 70s, where he re-established himself as a global superstar almost overnight through a series of blockbuster martial arts films that emphasized realism, philosophical depth, and raw physicality.
And if you like martial arts movies, films like The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and Way of the Dragon are discussed in almost reverential tones. And this trio of movies is responsible for lighting the fuse that catapulted Bruce Lee from a TV star to an international movie star. But it was Enter the Dragon, released just weeks after his death, that solidified his legend. A co-production between Hollywood and Hong Kong studios, Enter the Dragon broke cultural and racial barriers, proving that an Asian leading man could command a global box office, bringing in $100 million on a budget of just $850,000. In today's dollars, that would be equivalent to around $710 million, making it one of the world's highest-grossing films to that point. With multiple re-releases over the years, it has grossed more than $400 million, the equivalent of around $2 billion. Given its budget, it remains one of the most commercially successful and profitable movies of all time. Although critics lampooned it as a, quote, low-rent James Bond thriller with elements of martial arts thrown in, nobody could deny the talent and charisma of Lee. The film still holds an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes and has been added to the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress for its cultural significance. Enter the Dragon has been named the best martial arts film of all time, according to a 2013 poll, and continues to show up on lists of the greatest films of all time. And if parody is the sincerest form of flattery, Enter the Dragon's cultural significance can be easily measured by the countless comedic riffs on it since its release, including this somewhat offensive one from John Landis's 1977 comedy anthology, Kentucky Fried Movie.
This is not a charade. We need total concentration. Now, once again, this time, with feeling. Better.
The movie's also been sent up in recent movies like Balls of Fury and referenced in television shows like That 70s Show.
I honestly think, Derek, if you count like parts of movies that you've seen, like if that counts as a full viewing, I don't think I've ever seen any movie more than I've seen Enter the Dragon.
It's insane.
For about a 4-year period of my life, it was on constantly. I think it was one of the earliest VHS tapes that I ever had, and I watched it all the time.
It's one of those movies
my
when
friends would come over, we watch it. It was great.
Yeah, it was like a thing to have people over and watch it. It almost exists outside of being a movie. You don't really need to follow the narrative that much of a movie like Enter the Dragon because it's so iconic. It just feels like it always existed. Yeah. That yellow and black jumpsuit, the whole thing.
And his affiliation with Steve McQueen, but also Kareem. I was a huge basketball fan. I was a Lakers fan growing up. His affiliation with Kareem sort of like, for people like me, sort of brought it even to another level. I mean, Kareem was the biggest basketball star in the world by a mile.
He's good at Kung Fu, too.
And he
holds
good.
His own out there.
Very good. He's still, I think, he's now an old man, obviously, but I think he still practices the discipline.
So athletic.
Given the global success of Enter the Dragon, there's little surprise that producers, including Lee's own producing partner, Raymond Chow, rushed to complete the work on a posthumous release of Game of Death, which Lee was working on at the time of his death. Though he did not live to complete the project, his vision was clear: combat as a metaphor for personal growth, with each opponent representing a different challenge or philosophy. Like his other films, Game of Death wasn't just showcasing his physical prowess, it was deeply symbolic, reflecting Lee's beliefs in individualism, harmony, and overcoming obstacles. Although it features the iconic sequence with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Game of Death feels cobbled together. There's only about 12 minutes of footage with Bruce Lee, while the rest was filled in with body doubles and voice actors. Many scenes, including some of the fight sequences, include brief close-ups of stock footage from old Bruce Lee movies, and you can tell they are stitched in due to the difference in the film's quality. There's also some tasteless footage of Lee's actual corpse in his casket from the funeral, in a very hokey sequence in which a photo of Lee is taped to a mirror as a stand-in for the reflection. And audiences largely rejected the movie as a crass cash grab that failed to meet the exacting standards of real Bruce Lee movies. It holds a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes, but nevertheless managed to gross $50 million at the worldwide box office, which is still around $240 million in today's dollars.
I'd be remiss, and I feel like we'd lose some credibility if I didn't talk about Game of Death as it's kind of a joke. There are now just countless memes of how this movie was put together. There are literally 11 and a half minutes of real Bruce Lee footage, and they fill an entire movie. The pasted on over the mirror cutout of Bruce Lee, the face is not moving. It's just an image of Bruce Lee, is beyond silly.
Well, 10-year-old me says you're a joke, and the movie was fantastic.
That's good.
Yeah.
And Bruce Lee's influence on martial arts is still deeply felt today. His teachings emphasize economy of motion, speed, and psychological awareness, principles that have influenced not only martial artists, but also athletes, military trainers, and motivational speakers. And in the MMA world, fighters like George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva have acknowledged Lee's influence on their approach to combat. Meanwhile, his philosophical writings, compiled posthumously in books like The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, remain essential reading for anyone interested in the fusion of mind and body. You know, Bruce Lee didn't just kick down doors, he reshaped the entire arena. And when he died on that hot July day in Hong Kong, the world didn't just lose a fighter, lost a philosopher, a pioneer, and a hero. And although countless fans and admirers have opined on Lee's impact, perhaps nobody knew him better than his wife, Linda Lee Cadwell, who spoke about her late husband in the days following his unexpected passing, expressing her personal grief and mourning, but also recognizing what he meant to culture. She said, quote, "Bruce Lee was my husband, my best friend, and the love of my life, but he also belonged to the world. He had a vision of what martial arts could be, not just fighting, but a philosophy of life. His body may be gone, but his spirit and teachings will live on forever."
He made his dreams come true. He didn't wait for an opportunity to come along. He made his own opportunities. Bruce believed that each new day should be a day of discovery, that yesterday is passed by and tomorrow is not yet here. We should live in the present. And that's why every day should be a new day of creation.